sure you have project 1 open. This is in the PSD files folder under project 1, not the final one, but just the other option, resizing and placing layers. You should see something like this, and this is the basic layout of Photoshop. At the top, we have our menu with drop-down options for all kinds of different things. We're going to be going through a lot of these throughout the course. Basic file menu where you can save your project, create new projects, edit and image menus that allow you to edit the canvas, which is what we call the project itself, or the specific images that are in your project. A layer menu, which is how you can edit the layers, etc., etc. This is, I don't want to dive too deep into what each thing is because that's not how I want to teach this class, and I don't think that's the best way to learn. I think the best way to learn is to learn through practical projects and examples. And through the course, you're going to learn what most of these options are, but it's not a course where I'm going to say, okay, the first thing is file, new. What does new do? The next thing, file, open. What does open do? Because I don't think that's the best way to retain that information. But just knowing that your top menu is a great place to access a lot of options is good to know. Below this, you have your canvas right here. This is your main Photoshop project area where you're going to be doing all of your editing, you're typing out text, adding shapes. That's this main area where you're seeing your actual images. Going to the left, you have your toolbar. So the toolbar is where you have all your tools. You have tools that can crop your images, tools that can paint on your images, you have brushes, text, all kinds of things. Again, we'll be going through these one at a time throughout the course. It's not a course where I'm going to go just start at the top and go one by one, but know that we will be covering these throughout the entire course. If you hover over each tool, you kind of get a pop-up and the name of the tool, and it kind of shows you what it does. And then if you click and hold, you can see that for some of these tools, there's other options. So if you see this little arrow on the bottom right of each tool, if it has that, which I think pretty much everyone does now, except for the zoom tool down here, there are other options that you can get to it that are a related tool to the main tool. On the top, you have your sort of tool adjustment bar or tool settings bar. So depending on the tool that you have open, you'll have different settings up here that you can adjust to change how that tool works. Moving over to the right-hand side, you have several panels. Now, the way that this looks right now is what it should look like if you just open up Photoshop for the very first time. Now, I probably should have mentioned this in the very beginning, but if you have used Photoshop before, your layout might look a little different, and the panels or these windows, which is what we call panels in Photoshop, those might look different for you. What you probably want to do is go either up to Window, Workspace, and then choose Essentials, which is the default view or setup for this. There's different view options or setups depending on what kind of editing you're doing. Now, there's another place to get to this. If you click this drop down right here, it's this little icon that looks like the Photoshop layout itself, and then you can change it. If you're on Essentials and it doesn't look like this, click the Reset Essentials button because you might have moved some panels around or things like that. And by clicking Reset Essentials, it will get back to this basic Essentials view. And that's important as we move forward so that we're all on the same page. Let me just show you though, if I go to Workspace and change it to graphic or photography, for example, it changes what the windows are up here. Or say, let's go to graphic and web. Again, it changes what is up here. or the panels that are open. And you can see as I do that, there are different panels for all sorts of things. You've got color, swatches, gradient patterns. These are how you select colors that you're going to be using in your project. Below that, you have libraries and adjustments. Libraries is something that's really cool with Adobe, where you can save specific color swatches, even things like photos or brand images like logos that you can always have quick access to in your library. Below that, you have layers, channels, paths. So the layer panel is actually one where we're going to be working a lot in. And if you kind of look down below, you can see some layers already that I've created in this project. We have a bird layer, a kid layer, an elephant layer. We're going to be diving into this in more detail in a future lesson, but you can start to understand how Photoshop works by looking at the layer panel and seeing all the different layers we have. And that's basically how Photoshop works, is we're layering different images and effects and graphics on top of each other to create a brand new piece of art. So these panels can be adjusted and moved around and customized to what you think you're going to need to use for your specific project. There's one other bar right here that has more panels. It's kind of a way to hide or minimize the real estate that it takes up in your window. But there's different ones, and you can actually move panels onto this bar, which we'll be showing you in the next lesson. But just so you see these panels that are open. If you go up to Window, you can see which panels are open by seeing which ones have check marks next to them. So for example, if we want to have our character panel open, click Character, and now we have our character panel open on this bar. Character is our options for text. And it also opens the paragraph panel as well, which is related to character. And if you've ever, edited pretty much any text in any sort of application, even like Microsoft Word, you'll be familiar with what paragraph options there are. That's a lot. I know this is a lot, and this is kind of a whirlwind. If you feel like, hey, Phil, this is getting a little bit too in depth right this second, don't worry. We're going to be going over all of these things, and by the end of this course, you're going to be so comfortable with it. Now, if you're like, Phil, this is super basic, I know all this, let's get to the good stuff. Well, just be a little bit more patient because we're getting there, but for anyone who's brand new to Photoshop, understanding this stuff. To start this lesson, make sure you have Project 1 open. This is in the PSD files folder under Project 1, not the final one, but just the a sort of quick add-on lesson to the last one about customizing your workspace. All of these panels and windows can be customized exactly how you want it. So as you saw, there are different tabs that open up other panels. We can close these tabs. For example, you might not need the library tab, so just right-click and choose Close. For adjustments, you might not want that as well, so let's just click Close there as well. Color, I think, is definitely important. You can also adjust the size of these panels. For example, a lot of times in these projects, you're going to be adding a ton of layers, and you might want this layer panel to be even bigger. You can also drag to the left or right, depending on how much space or size you need there. Maybe you're editing a project that has a lot of text. So instead of having the character panel just be a pop-up here, you can actually click and move any of these panels around and add it to a new sort of window. So you can see as I hover, these different windows or blocks get highlighted. So if I highlight, if you're moving it and it highlights the entire block and you drop it, it adds it to that existing block. Now, it kind of made it small, or the color bigger, because the character panel is only so tall. But if we go back to the layers panel, you can see that it makes this bigger. If we click and hover this over the window again, but we put it just at the top edge or to the left edge, you can see what happens where it actually creates a brand new block or a brand new window. I can then take my paragraph panel and drop it into this block, and you can click and drag them to the left or right, these tabs, to order them to have one in front of the other, and that's kind of your default option. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have my paragraph settings and my character panel settings or character settings in this bar, because I think that's important. My layers, I'm going to have make it super big like that. For now, we're going to leave our color and swatches, everything like this. And I think that's pretty much good to go. One other thing, just so that you're aware of, if you are working with multiple projects open in Photoshop, you can see that they have tabs up here in the main canvas window right here. So just so you're aware, if you need to open multiple projects, you can do that, and you can just switch from one tab to the next, or one project to the next with this tab. One other thing is, if you want your tools to be a little bit more compressed, click this little arrow button, and you can kind of see these arrows over here as well, and that's going to typically expand or contract or compress any of these panels. So I typically work with my tools up and down like this, but if you want to see all of them, which might be a little bit easier, it's like that. Otherwise, you're kind of losing out on some of the tools underneath. It's kind of cropped off. So actually opening it up like that is probably pretty good for us. So hopefully you understand about how to customize your workspace and panels, and the goal now is to do the same. So go to your Photoshop app, if you're following along, and make it look something like this with these panels open and the tools like so. Photoshop interface and how to get around to the different elements. I think it's a good idea to back up a little bit and learn how to open up or start a new Photoshop file from scratch. So I'm going to exit out of the projects that I had opened before. You can also, if you have those open, go to File, New, and it's going to bring open this window for a new Photoshop document. Or if you're opening up Photoshop and you have this window, just click Create New. This window has a lot of pre-built templates that you can use, so you can see any recent documents that you've started. For example, if you are always creating a YouTube thumbnail like I do, I have a couple different projects that have those dimensions already, so that I don't have to create it from scratch. Or you can go through these tabs up here and you can kind of see some common options. So under print, you have your typical 8.5 by 11 inch paper file. For web, you have different ones for like websites, mobile, film, and video. Again, this is a great one to get straight to the perfect size for a thumbnail, for your YouTube video, or whatever it is, or a graphic for your video, depending on the presets. But if you want to create something completely from scratch, you go over to this panel over in the right-hand side, or you can start with one of these options that you have and then customize it. Either way works. But here we have on our right-hand side, we have the different options. So you have a name. So if you want to call it a certain thing, so we'll call this, maybe we'll call this social, if I could spell, social post. A social post, we might want to make a square. And then below the title you give it, you have your options for the size and the aspect ratio. So you have your width and height, and this is in inches currently, but you can change this. So for example, if you want to work in pixels, which is common for anything that's going to go on online, you can use pixels, and say we want something to be a perfect square, we would put the width to be 1000 by 1000. And I'm just tabbing through these and using my keyboard, or you can just click and type in your numbers. Say, so now the orientation for a square doesn't matter if it's portrait or landscape, which you can see here, I can't click, but say it was inches. So say we have, and you can see that when I go back to inches, it converts those pixels to inches for us. But say we have a 5:7 photo, but we want to change it automatically to orientation or to a landscape orientation, you can just click this button and it will kind of swap these numbers to change the orientation. Let's go back to our pixels though. And now let's go 1000 by 1000. The next option is this artboards checkbox. Now, artboards is something that is newer to Photoshop, and if you've used Adobe Illustrator, you are familiar with what artboards are. But we'll be going into depth about this later on in this section. But basically, what this allows you to do is have multiple versions of a project that you're working on up at one time. So before, we would actually have to open up multiple different Photoshop files to have like 2 different projects we're working on. But now with artboards, you can actually have like 2 1000 by 1000 pixel projects or graphics that you're working on in one project. I know that sounds a little confusing, but for now, just leave that unchecked and we'll go into that later on. Resolution. This has to do with the quality of your graphic. So you can see here we have currently it says 300. And then on the right it says pixels per inch. In the US we're using inches, but in other parts of the world, or depending on what project you're working on, you might want to use pixels per centimeter. But really what this means is it's going to have 300 pixels per inch, which is a lot. Little individual pixels per inch of a graphic or a project. The higher the resolution obviously means the higher resolution and the higher quality, but you don't really need to go above 300 typically. That's kind of the upper limit of what you would want for anything, even for print documents. You can go even lower. 72 is kind of a standard lower end resolution. 100 to 150 is kind of your mid-range. And so you can play around with it, but typically staying around 150 is going to be perfectly fine. If you had literally 1 pixel per inch, this would mean that for every inch of your project, it would have 1 pixel, which is an individual color basically. And if pixels are a little confusing to you, something you might want to refer to is the resolution of like your television. A lot of televisions, you see the 4K resolution or the standard 1080p resolution. So for now, we're just going to leave it at that. The only other thing to note is that if you have a higher resolution, it's going to increase the file size. So sometimes you might not need to go higher and might not want to go higher, even if you could, to kind of minimize that file from getting too big. So let's just leave it at 150 for now. Next, you have your color mode. So typically, you're going to want to work in RGB color. There's different color modes. A couple are popular, RGB and then CMYK. CMYK is popular for print. So if you know you're going to be printing a project out, you might want to work in CMYK because if you go to a printer and your project is in RGB, then the colors might end up a little bit different than what you were expecting. But for any sort of online graphic, use RGB. And of course, like grayscale, that's going to just be black and white. Along with this color mode, you have 8-bit, 16-bit, and 32-bit. I would leave it on 8-bit. The higher the bit means the number of basically shades of color that are available to you in a project or when you're working on a graphic. 8-bit is perfectly fine for pretty much any project that you would need, unless you are more advanced and you know, for example, if you're working on some sort of graphic for 3D animation or for an app or something, and whoever's asked you to create the graphic says, I need it in 16-bit color, just you know where to change that, but for now, just leave it at 8-bit. Under this, you have your background contents. So right now, this is basically what the background of your project will be. So right now it's set to white, and we'll see what that looks like. But you can change this to a specific color, or if you click this drop-down menu, you can choose a transparent color, or lack of color, really, just transparency. So if you're creating something like a logo where you don't want a background, you can have it be transparent. Now, this does more have to do with the background of your canvas that you're working on. You can always change the background color or add a layer with the color to a project to have a different color. And that would be done in your project itself. This is more just in terms of the canvas and how it looks when you're working. And I'll show you this in just a second. And then there are a couple advanced options for color profile and pixel aspect ratio. Again, these are more advanced. You would probably know when you need to change these if you know what these are. Color profiles, this will change depending on what monitor you're using. And for the pixels, again, if you're using or creating something for a specific video project, you might change this. But for you watching this course, I'm going to bet you that you just want to leave it at square pixels and the color profile at whatever it is set to right now for you. All right, you still with me? Because now we're going to click create and it's going to open up this project. And you can see that it has a white background. Really quickly, I'm just going to click file new. I'm going to change the background to black and click create. And then we're going to go to file new and change the background to transparent and click create. And so you can see if I tab between these, the different options you have for the background being a specific color. And the transparency is this checkerboard pattern. So if you ever see this sort of checkerboard, it means that it's going to be transparent. Like I said, perfect for editing or creating logos or graphics where you don't want a background. That being said, you can still create graphics in these other projects and turn off your background. And I'll just show you really quickly, even though we haven't gone over the layers panel. If you check on this little eyeball option next to the background, first we have to turn off the lock, which this background layer is typically locked in the beginning, and then we turn off create, and it's going to open up this project. And you can see that it has a white background. Really quickly, I'm just going to click file new. I'm going to change the background to black. And then we're going to go to file new, the background to transparent. And so you can see if I tab between these, the different options of background. That being said, you can still create graphics in these other projects and turn off your background. And I haven't gone over the layers panel. If you check on this little eyeball next to the background, first we have to turn off the lock, which this background layer is typically locked in the beginning, and then we turn off that eyeball. You can see that it becomes transparent. So this is sort of just a temporary background that's locked. Same here with this black background. Unlock it. It becomes a layer instead of a background, and you can now turn that on or off. So there's always kind of multiple ways to do things in Photoshop, And you'll realize that as you go through this course. And if you take other courses or watch other tutorials by other people, you'll see that they do things differently in Photoshop. And that's completely fine. I'm showing you the ways that I do different things that makes the most sense to me. And I hope that it works for you. But like I said, there's lots of different ways to do the same thing in Photoshop. It's such an advanced application. But now you know how to open up a project at any sort of specific size or aspect ratio in Photoshop. Fix into a project that you've created from scratch. So I've gone ahead and closed out those other projects that we started and just have this social post 1000 by 1000 pixel project. There's lots of different ways to add a photo to this project. Probably one of the easiest is if you open up your documents or your Finder and you find a photo, and on a Mac I can select a photo, for example, and then just tab back over to Photoshop, which for a Mac is Command Tab, and then you can go through. For a PC it's probably Control Tab, and then I still am clicking and holding that image, and I can just drop it into my project like so. So now that photo is in my project. It's still in sort of a temporary place mode. It's wanting me to actually drop it somewhere, so I can move it around with the move tool. I can resize it, so if I take these corners and move it up and down, it resizes, or in any of these sort of handles on the corners or in the center, click and move it around. Only until I press the return key on my keyboard does it actually place it and kind of like drop it into the project. So you'll see when I press return, there it's now on my project, and I can then go about editing it or adding other layers or photos. Another way you can place an image is going to the File, Place Linked option. Click Place Linked, go to your folder, you can find another photo, and then click Place. And again, it adds it to the project. And you see that it automatically sizes it as close as possible to the project or the canvas that you've started. So you can see that it matches the width and height of this project. If you want it smaller or bigger, again, you can kind of move it around and just press the return key to place it, because now you can see if I'm kind of moving around and I try to go to the bird, for example, it's not going to let me. You see that my mouse turns into this rotate option where I can rotate this image if I want. And this happens when I hover outside of the image. I can press Command Z to undo anything. The other thing you might want to know is there are a couple keyboard shortcuts that are handy. So if you are rotating, if you hold the Shift key down, it kind of locks it to some specific rotations. And you can see the degree of rotation hovering next to my mouse as I do this. See, it's 15, goes back to 0, -15, etc. It locks it to those, it's I guess every 15 degrees instead of just a free-for-all. So that's going to help, especially if you have an image and you want to rotate it exactly 90 degrees. Another keyboard shortcut to note is the Shift button. If you click any of the handles, which are these little blocks around the edge that you use to resize an image, it allows you to stretch and skew this image. If I'm not holding the Shift button, it locks it to that aspect ratio, and you can see that after I kind of squished it and then I undo the Shift button, it now locks it to that aspect, and you can still resize it, but I'm going to undo that because I don't want to mess with the aspect of this. A couple more are the Option or Alt key. So if you're clicking any of these handles, and if you hold the Option on a Mac or Alt on a PC, see how it scales from the center? That's a super handy one to note. If you hold the Command button on a PC, that would be Control, and you click any of these edges, it warps just that handle or from that corner or whatever. So you can get super funky with this. It does the whole side or top if you click the center handle. But if you do click the corner with the command button selected, it locks the other handles and allows you just to warp that sort of side or that corner of the image. So again, you can get creative with that. The one that I use the most is the Option key that allows me to scale from the center. And then finally, press Return to put this photo and kind of actually place it into this project. You'll notice as I do that, our layer panel starts to get filled up. There's a complete section coming up on the layers panel on how to use this, but you can kind of start to see what's happening. The bird is below our boy. And a quick sneak peek is you can move these layers up and down. So now we have our bird on top of our boy. Cool, so that's pretty much how you place photos and graphics. This is the same if you're adding any sort of logos or PNG graphics with transparent backgrounds. It's the same process of just placing it in the project. Move and zoom around a project. Right now, we are at 100% view, and you can see this down here in the bottom left of your main canvas panel. You can zoom in or zoom out by clicking in there and changing the percentage. This percentage might look different depending on what your actual computer screen resolution is. So the higher the resolution allows you to have a higher quality image or a higher resolution image that you're working on. So 100% might look different depending on, one, the size of your actual project you're working on and your computer resolution. So if you're looking at your computer and it's a different percentage, don't worry. Those are the two reasons why that would be. Quick tool that you definitely want to know is the zoom tool. And if you hover over these tools, you can see the keyboard shortcut for the tool. So Z is the keyboard shortcut tool for the zoom tool. V is the keyboard shortcut for the move tool, which is the tool that we've been using this entire time, and probably your default tool that you're going to go back to whenever you're not using any of these other tools. So you can see now that I press Z, I have this magnifying glass. If I click, it zooms into the part of the project that I click towards. So you can see if I click, now it's zooming in 100, 200, 300, 400, 500%. So now you can really get in detail. Another tool that you want to know is the hand tool. So you can press the H button, and now this allows you to move the canvas around or the project. I'm not actually moving the bird image or the boy image around. I'm just moving around my canvas. You can also do this with these scroll bars on the top and bottom that appear when you're zoomed in past the window. So if we're zoomed out, which is another tool that you want to know, we press Z on our keyboard to go back to our zoom tool. And then a lot of these tools have sort of an alternate option. And if you press the Option or Alt key, get it? Alternate, Alt or Option, you get that other option. So I have zoom out. So the other option for the zoom tool is the zoom out button. So I can zoom out all the way till we get back to 100%. Now you can also see that the zoom tool has the options up here. So you can choose to zoom in, zoom out. You also have some quick buttons up here to zoom to 100%. So say we're zoomed in and you want to go back to 100%, you can do that. You can also fit to screen or fill screen. So fit to screen will basically zoom it so that the entire project is in this screen or in this panel. Fill screen will fill it so that the edges fill the entire frame. But if your project or your window is taller or small, more wide or more narrow, it will actually kind of cut off the top and bottom. So you would have to move around with these sliders, or remember the hand tool. Now, another cool thing about the hand tool that I want you to know is as I zoom in here to our bird, there's sort of a shortcut for the shortcut. If you press the space bar, you temporarily get the hand or the move tool. and you can move around, and then if you stop pressing the space bar, it goes back to the tool that you were using. So say I was on the select tool, but I want to move over to our boy, just press the space bar and I can move over there, and then it goes back to my move tool when I stop pressing the space bar. Another keyboard shortcut that I like to use is the Command 0, which will zoom out to fit the entire project. So instead of going to your zoom tool and click fit screen, Command 0 will do the same thing basically. So that's how you kind of navigate and move around your project. Again, I go back to my selection tool or move tool, and I can go back to editing as I would. Z for the zoom tool, and H or spacebar for the hand or move tool. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, I'm going to show you how to add using artboards in your workflow in Photoshop. I briefly mentioned them before, and this is going to be familiar to you if you use Adobe Illustrator. Basically, what we can do is have multiple versions of this canvas that we are working on in this one project. It's great for creating multiple versions, or if you're creating a series of graphics or things that just, it makes sense to have the photos, the fonts, the style, and just visually be able to see it in the same project as you're working on it. Artboards is the way to go. If you are using an earlier version of Photoshop, this may not be available to you. This was added in the, I believe, CC 2019 version. So how do you create an artboard? The first way is, if you already have a project open, is to click on your move tool and go down to the artboard tool. Now you'll see that our cursor is now the artboard tool. And up at the top, you have your options for the size and the aspect of your artboard. So you can create a custom, or you can use one of these preset options. So say you want to create, this is really good if you're working on like apps. If you're creating an app for the iPad Pro 12.9 inch, for example, or the Apple Watch, we can go ahead and select one of these. Let's say iPhone X. I'm going to press the space bar to get my hand tool. I'm going to move over to this sort of blank space to actually just simply create an artboard that's exactly this size. You click this plus button. This changes our mouse to the create in an artboard tool, and just click. And you'll see there that now we have this artboard that is sort of the size of our actual iPhone. Now, say you want to create sort of a custom size, you can really just choose any of these or just leave it on custom, and then click and drag. Okay, so see, now I have two artboards. Say you want to duplicate one of these artboards so that you have the exact same settings and size. Just click the plus button. You can do it on the top or bottom, and you can see that it adds it above or below, depending on how you want to work. And you also notice that on the right-hand side, you have these artboards, which is now a separate group within your layer panel. Again, we're going to be going over the layer panel in the next section in more depth, but just it's good to know that. And you'll be able to organize your different assets into each artboard. Another way to copy an artboard is to have your artboard tool selected, press the Option key on your keyboard. First, select the artboard itself, or the background, or the title up at the top, and then just click, holding down Option or Alt on a PC, Option on a Mac, and then drag it. And now you can see that it actually copies that artboard with all of the assets in it. So pretty cool sort of workflow. I know it looks kind of messy right now. Typically, you'd want it to stay a little bit more organized. But throughout this course, you're going to see me using artboards. It's also a great way if you are following along with the projects. You can have one of my final project up and also be using your own project or creating your own project. So you'll learn more as you practice, but I just wanted to mention this because it is a cool new feature in the latest versions of Photoshop for your workflow.